What's up, YouTube? So like the title says, today we're going to be setting up the Arturia KeyLab Essential Mark III with FL Studio. So there are some other guides on YouTube showing you how to do this, but we're going to do things a little differently, and we're going to avoid the issue that you might have ran into if you had followed those guides where you'll play a note on the keyboard and it'll play through multiple plugins at once. So we're going to avoid that, if you know what I'm talking about. So anyway, this is what works best for me. So sort of a step zero is I had just recently reset my FL Studio settings to factory defaults. So what I did was I deleted my user data folder, and then I used a diagnostic tool to reset all the other settings to factory defaults. So this is not actually necessary, but if you run into issues later down in this guide, if you had been, for example, in the past messing with custom MIDI mappings, you might find you need to do this, but again, don't do this unless you find you need to, and just be aware that you'll lose any settings. So the way you would do that is you would go to this location, the user data folder, and you would just delete image line, and then you would go to your FL install directory, and then go to System, Tools, Diagnostics, and this FL Diagnostic executable has the ability to reset your FL settings. You'll need FL Studio closed to do that. But anyway, again, not required, but might come in handy. So what you'll want to do is go to the MIDI Control Center. I'm assuming you have this installed. If not, you can grab it from the Arturia Software Center. One thing we're doing differently than the other guides is we're not using any user templates. We're just going to use Arturia and DAW. So that'll keep this a bit simpler. And then come into device settings, make sure DAW mode is on Mackie, and you can disable the user presets if you find that they're getting in your way later down. And also make sure you're on the latest firmware, and you can upgrade here if you need to. So that's all we're going to do here. Again, Mackie is really the only critical setting in here. So you can close this out, come back into FL Studio, go to Options, MIDI Settings, and now you'll have these devices here. So the first thing would be to set this to the correct script. So you can see I don't have the script. So you may or may not have it. If you don't, you could hit Update MIDI Scripts. And what this does is it searches the internet for any sort of input devices that it's detecting. So in a moment, it'll come up with another dialog box right around here. Okay, it said that the scripts were added. So now I should see these settings, or these scripts. So I'm going to select KeyLab Essential Mark III. Make sure this is enabled, and then for the MCU HUI input, you're going to set that to Legacy, Mackie Control Universal. Make sure that's enabled as well, and those are the only two you need enabled. These two should be disabled, and we're not going to set any custom ports here. What other guides have you do is set this to say port 1 or some arbitrary port, and then in all your plugins they're going to have you set the plugin input port to the exact same port. But that is what creates the issue of multiple plugins playing at the same time, regardless of what you have in focus. So we're going to avoid that. Just leave this default. Okay, now backing up, let's say you didn't have it didn't find the KeyLab Essential Mark III. Maybe this would apply to older versions of FL Studio, I'm not sure. But in that case, you can download it from FL Studio's website. So if you do this Google search, KeyLab Essential Mark III DAW integration, come to the support article, go to FL Studio, download the dedicated guide. It's a zip file. So you would extract that and then come into it, and there's an FL Studio scripts, you would copy this. Then, if you go to options, file settings, or just hit the file tab, again, this user data folder, if you go there, so image line, FL Studio, settings, hardware, okay? This is where you would paste it, inside this hardware folder. But for me, since it was able to find them on the internet automatically, I don't need to paste it. But this is where you would put it if you have to do it manually. So anyway, I'm going to close this out. And then again, make sure KeyLab Essential Mark III and Mac Universal, no port selected. We're good to go. Okay. At this point, if you put the KeyLab into DAW mode, you should see that the main encoder, whoops. Of course, it's finicky. Okay, yeah, I'm not sure what happened there, but the main encoder should now control the DAW controls. So, you can hit your play button, your stop, your record, tap tempo, all that should work when you're in DAW mode. Now, next up is dealing with plugins. So, we'll start with Analog Lab, right? But these next few steps will apply to any plugin. So, what you want to do is come into here, the cogs icon, and then hit this option and set the input port to 10. Okay, it needs to be specifically at 10 because we hadn't mapped it to a specific port earlier, and by default, this is sending the encoders over port 10. Okay, so again, on all of your plugins, regardless of if it's Analog Lab or Arturia or some third party, you're going to want this to be on input port 10. Okay, after you've done that, a useful thing to do is save it as a preset. So I like to save it directly in this plugin presets folder. I'll call it ALV for Analog Lab 5. And now, let's say this is a fresh project. You didn't have this here. You'd come into plugin presets, ALV, drop this in. Okay, and now it'll be on port 10 by default. Great. Set this to track 1. So now we're inside of Analog Lab. I'll go to the Arturia mode. On Arturia VSTs, now by default, these encoders will just work out of the box. So that's great. That gets you a lot of the way. I could drop a second ALV in here. I'll put this on a different track so you could see where the output's coming from. Pay attention to here and here. On this one, I'll send this first parameter all the way down. And you can see that didn't touch this parameter on this first instance. They're completely separate. It depends on which one is in focus, right? They're distinct. If I play a note, sorry if that's loud. If this one's in focus, it'll come out of track 1. If this one is in focus, it comes out of track 2, and it's not playing both at the same time. So that's great. Okay, now let's deal with third-party plugins. So I'll use Contact as an example. Put this on track 3. So again, regardless of if it's Arturia or not, you're always going to want to set the input port to 10. Okay? And again, I can save this as a preset if I'd like. Plugin presets. Good. Okay. I could reload from that preset, but I'm not going to do that. So now let's pull up an instrument. Okay. Now, by default, since this is not Arturia, these encoders are not going to work, right? They're not set up for this VST. So the way we get this to work is you want to be in Arturia mode, okay? You want to be in this for any VST you're working in. You want to be in DAW mode when you want to use DAW controls, okay? But when you're working in a VST, even if it's a third-party VST, you want to be in Arturia mode, okay? Next, what we're going to do is map the encoders to the parameters in this VST. So you can do this pretty quickly using the multi-link function. So if you come up here, hit this little encoder icon, and then you'll queue up different parameters. So I'll queue the attack, the release, and the stereo width just by, tweaking them. And you can see up here it said that they were queued up. So now I right-click this and I hit Override Global Links. Okay. Now what I'm going to do is for that first parameter, I want that on this first encoder. So I'm going to move the first encoder. Sometimes you just have to move it just a smidge, otherwise it'll skip through all these at once. So you can see that one had set and it brought me to the next parameter. So I'll move the second encoder just a smidge, and then the third one. Okay, great. So what we did there was we set up a global link. So these settings will apply regardless of the project. So I can close this out, open up a blank project, and I don't have to set anything else up besides making sure that this is on port 10 again. But now for this specific plugin, so Contact 7, any instance of this is going to have that mapping applied by default. So now you can see this encoder is working. It can control attack, release, stereo width. Fantastic. So also, again, it's not causing any interference with the other plugins. Right, this is coming out of track 3, which is Contact. I go here, and no interference. So that is about it. So just to reiterate, I can completely close this out, open up a blank project. Okay, I'm gonna delete these. I'm gonna use my plugin presets that I created before. So I'll create one ALV, and again, this will automatically be on 10 now. And I'll create one contact instance. And I will go back to my instrument. I'm gonna set analog lab to track 1, contact to track 2. Great. Now I can, make sure I'm in Arturia mode, okay, for either plugin. Whichever one is in focus, that's the output that will trigger here, right? I bring up contact, bingo, okay? And the effects, again, the mapping held because that was a global mapping that we did. So this, goes, it applies in any project, including a blank project. And if I come back here, I could adjust the brightness. I come back here and it didn't affect this because it was not in focus. So that's about it. I hope that helps. I think this probably is the best solution that I've come across so far. So I wanted to share it with you guys. And yeah, so thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys later. Bye.